An exposition with practical observations of the first book of Samuel. This is commentary by Matthew Henry, read by Josiah Aldridge. This book, and that which follows it, bear the name of Samuel in the title, not because he was the penman of them, except of so much of them as fell within his own time, to the 25th chapter of the first book, in which we have an account of his death, but because the first book begins with a large account of him, his birth and childhood, his life and government, and the rest of these 2 volumes that are denominated from him contains the history of the reigns of Saul and David, who were both anointed by him. And because the history of these 2 kings takes up the greatest part of these books, the vulgar Latin calls them the first and second books of the kings, and the 2 that follow the third and fourth, which the titles in our English Bibles take notice of with an alias, otherwise called the first book of the kings, and etc. The Septuagint calls them the first and second book of the kingdoms. It's needless to contend about it, but there is no occasion to vary from the Hebrew verity. These 2 books contain the history of the last 2 of the judges, Eli and Samuel, who were not, as the rest, men of war, but priests, and so much of them is an appendix to the book of Judges, and of the first 2 of the kings, Saul and David, and so much of them is an entrance upon the history of the kings. They contain a considerable part of the sacred history, are sometimes referred to in the New Testament, and often in the titles of David's Psalms, which, if placed in their order, would fall in these books. It is uncertain who was the penman of them. It is probable that Samuel wrote the history of his own time, and that after him some of the prophets that were with David, Nathan as likely as any, continued it. This first book gives us a full account of Eli's fall and Samuel's rise in good government, chapters 1 through 8, of Samuel's resignation of the government and Saul's advancement and maladministration, chapters 9 through 15, the choice of David, his struggles with Saul, Saul's ruin at last, and the opening of the way for David to the throne, chapters 16 through 31. And these things are written for our learning.